So, a few months ago, my cousin Daniel reached out to me out of the blue. We weren't super close growing up, family reunions and maybe a handful of holiday get-togethers, but we always got along well enough. He's one of those perpetually struggling people, the kind who never seems to catch a break. Anyway, he told me he'd just lost his job, his apartment, and basically everything in one swoop. I was pretty shocked by the whole thing and admittedly a little skeptical, but he sounded genuinely desperate, so I figured, hey, we're family. I want someone to help me if I were in his position, right? So I offered him my guest room for a few weeks while he got things sorted. At first, it felt good. Really good, actually. I cleaned up the guest room, bought extra groceries, and even made a few basic rules to help things go smoothly. I was upfront about it being a short-term situation, and he seemed to understand. He thanked me profusely, saying he'd be out and independent in no time, swore up and down he'd find a job ASAP, and even said he'd pitch in with rent once he got his first paycheck. It sounded perfect. For the first week, Daniel was mostly on his best behavior. He was out during the day, presumably looking for jobs, and when he was home, he'd clean up after himself in the kitchen and even offer to help with dishes and cooking. It was almost pleasant having another person around. We'd watch TV together in the evenings, he'd tell me funny stories from his misadventures, and I genuinely felt like I was helping someone get back on their feet. But then week 2 hit, and it's like a switch flipped. At first, it was small things. Dishes left in the sink, cups all over the living room, shoes strewn around the entryway. He'd leave lights on in every room he entered and regularly cranked the thermostat up way higher than I was used to. Okay, minor annoyances, I could live with those. But it was a little irritating when I'd ask him to tidy up, and he'd just laugh it off like, oh, I'll get to it later. Later somehow never came, and the mess just accumulated. Week 3 rolled around, and now it was clear he'd started to get a bit too comfortable. Not only was he leaving stuff everywhere, but he'd also started eating my groceries without asking. I'd come home to find entire meals gone. Leftovers I'd planned on for my lunch the next day were just missing. When I asked him about it, he shrugged, saying he didn't think it was a big deal because he was family. I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach about where this was going. Then it got worse. Daniel wasn't going out during the day anymore. He'd stay up late gaming in the living room, yelling into his headset at who knows who, while I was trying to sleep for work the next day. When I'd ask him about job hunting, he'd give me vague answers like, yeah, I'll get around to it, or I'm waiting to hear back. I even printed out some job listings, which he barely glanced at before tossing them on the coffee table, where they gathered dust. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find a stranger in my kitchen, a friend of Daniel's who was apparently crashing here for the night without my permission. They'd made themselves at home, using my coffee, eating cereal, and giving me an offhand hey like I was the intruder. I pulled Daniel aside and told him I wasn't okay with him having people over without asking. He brushed me off with, relax, it's just one friend. At this point, I started to feel a little like a stranger in my own home. Every request to Daniel, whether to clean up, stop inviting people over, or just show some basic respect for the space, was met with an eye roll or a dismissive, I'll handle it. But handling it never happened. He'd leave for hours in my car, which he'd borrowed just once, then again, and then apparently whenever he wanted, running up gas I'd paid for. I finally told him I needed my car back, and he acted genuinely insulted, like I'd accused him of stealing. The last straw came when I asked him, again, how his job search was going. He went off about how it's not as easy as it looks, and that some of us don't get cushy jobs handed to us. He told me I just didn't understand what it was like to struggle, and implied that I was selfish for expecting him to leave when he was still getting his life together. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I was covering his food, his shelter, his transportation, practically his whole life at this point. And I was the selfish one? I told him I needed him to start contributing or at least take the job search seriously, or we need to talk about finding him another place to stay. He gave me a cold stare, said, wow, I guess blood really doesn't mean anything to you, and then stormed off to the guest room, slamming the door. Since then, he's been giving me the silent treatment, which is honestly a relief. But I know this can't go on forever, and I'm dreading the moment when I have to make him leave. Part of me feels like I'm letting him down when he's at his lowest, but another part feels like he's taking advantage of my kindness. So here I am, genuinely asking, AITA? I've always been the office prankster, Not in the water bucket above the door sense, but in a low-key, annoyingly clever kind of way. I like to think of myself as the mastermind of harmless jokes. Harmless being the key word, or at least I thought so. It all started when Sarah, my co-worker and a close friend in the office, left her desk for a few hours. She had one of those tidy, minimalistic setups, the kind that screams, "I am organized, don't mess with me." The temptation was too strong to resist. My prank of choice? A classic. I set up her computer to play Baby Shark on loop whenever she logged back in. Not very creative, sure, but always solid. I figured she'd get a laugh out of it, roll her eyes, and we'd move on. Except she didn't laugh. When she came back and that song blared through her speakers, her face went pale. Sarah is intense, organized, productive, and well, she's always the type to take things seriously. It took her a full 2 minutes to figure out how to shut it off, all while the rest of the office was cracking up. When she finally turned to me, there was a tight-lipped smile that looked like it was hanging on by a thread. "Funny, real funny," she said, but her voice was flat. She spent the rest of the day pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. I brushed it off, chalking it up to a bad mood. But later, I heard from another coworker that she was furious, embarrassed in front of the whole team, especially since our boss had walked by during the incident. Maybe that should have been my wake-up call, but I shrugged it off. The next morning, my desk was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Someone had piled all my files into a mountain, papers strewn everywhere, pens uncapped, my carefully curated, organized chaos destroyed. My coffee mug, filled with little packets of ketchup. That alone almost sent me over the edge. I knew it had to be Sarah. No one else in the office would have had the gall. When I looked over, she was typing at her desk, not a single hair out of place, totally ignoring me. All right, if she wanted to play, I'd play. I spent the rest of the day plotting. For my next move, I changed her desktop background to a fake error screen that looked like her hard drive was about to crash. The next day, I waited for her reaction, hiding my smirk as she walked in, turned on her computer, and froze. It took her about 5 minutes to realize it was fake, but by then, she was already sweating. Her reaction was barely visible to anyone else, but I could see the fury behind her eyes as she glared at me. A few hours later, I went to take a sip of my coffee, only to choke. Salt. My entire cup was loaded with it. I spat it out into a napkin, the taste of salt and bitter coffee making my eyes water. I looked over, and sure enough, Sarah was watching me, an eyebrow raised. "You're really pushing it," I muttered, but she just shrugged. That was when things really started to get out of hand. I wasn't about to let her win, so I upped my game. I swapped out the office phone ringer on her desk to a loud, obnoxious duck quack sound. It was childish, sure, but the satisfaction of seeing her flinch every time the phone rang was too good. She tried to ignore it, but after her 5th call, she marched over to me. "Enough!" She spoke quietly, but her voice was sharp. "You're a child, you know that?" And then she walked away. I should have taken the hint, but I couldn't resist one more move. I decided to print out an old, embarrassing college photo of her that I found on Facebook and slipped it into a folder labeled Employee of the Month on her desk. Childish, sure, but I thought it would get a laugh, right? Wrong. When she found it, she was visibly shaken. Her face flushed, and I could see her hands tremble as she held the picture. Without a word, she ripped it up, tossed it in the trash, and left the office early that day. Suddenly, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. Guilt started to settle in, but I pushed it away. After all, we'd been pranking each other. She'd understand eventually, right? That's when things took a turn for the nuclear. The next day, I walked into the office to find a massive email sent to the entire team from my account. Subject line? An open letter of apology for my childish pranks. The email was brutal. It painted me as the office fool, with a long list of reasons I was unprofessional and how I had disrespected the workspace. Everyone saw it, even the boss. My stomach dropped as I read through the fake email, each line making my face burn hotter. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, people snickering under their breath. I felt humiliated like a bug under a microscope. When I confronted Sarah, she barely looked up. "You started it," she said calmly. Maybe I should have let it go, but I was hurt, and my pride was on the line. My final move? I created a fake Instagram post, making it look like Sarah had been complaining about the company, mocking her own co-workers. It wasn't meant to be public, just a little joke sent to our work group chat. But someone took a screenshot. Within hours, it had made its way up the chain, and Sarah was called into HR. She was written up for inappropriate conduct, and I could see the distress on her face as she tried to explain that it was fake. She knew it was me, but without proof, there wasn't much she could say. After that, Sarah didn't speak to me at all. In fact, she hardly spoke to anyone, and a week later, she handed in her notice. She was leaving for another job. The office atmosphere soured. People knew I'd been behind the Instagram thing, even if I denied it. Gossip circulated, and I started to feel like an outsider. The guilt I'd been ignoring hit me full force when I passed her empty desk for the last time. The whole thing had spiraled, all because of a stupid song on her computer. I never meant for it to go so far, but somehow I kept going, hoping to win whatever winning even meant. Now, months later, I can't help but wonder, did I take it too far, or was it all fair game? Should I have backed down first? Or would that have just made things worse? I thought we were both in on the joke, but looking back, I'm not sure where the line was crossed. So, here's the scene. My partner, Riley, and I are on the brink of moving across the country. I've landed a job in Seattle that's way better than what I'm doing now, and Riley can do their work from anywhere, so they're coming along. It's a huge deal for both of us. New city, new lifestyle, and all that, but we have very different ideas on how to handle this monumental change. See, I'm a planner. I like my spreadsheets, my timelines, and my carefully mapped out budgets. I think it's my way of feeling in control. Whenever something big is happening, I dive into research mode, mapping out every possible detail, so there are no surprises. Riley, on the other hand, is, let's just say, more go with the flow. They believe things always fall into place as long as you're flexible. I admire that about Riley, I really do, but right now, it's driving me up the wall. We started talking about how to handle the move one night over dinner. I had my notebook ready with a list of tasks I'd already started categorizing by priority. Find apartment, update address, set up utilities, research best moving companies. I even had color coding for things that required us both to decide together versus what I could do on my own. I was feeling pretty good, prepared even, until Riley shook their head with a soft laugh. "You're going to wear yourself out before we even start," they said, smiling as they took a bite of pasta. "We don't need to stress every little detail right now. Why don't we just start with finding a place, and then the rest will happen naturally?" I blinked at them, mildly horrified. "Naturally?" I repeated. "Riley, we're moving across the country in 3 months. We need a plan, not a hope and a prayer. Not everything needs to be planned down to the last second, babe. Sometimes you just have to trust that you can handle things as they come up." We went back and forth like that, each convinced our way was better. I explained how mapping things out reduces my stress, while Riley argued that over-preparation would take all the excitement out of the move. It's not that either of us was trying to change the other's mind. We were just dead set on our own methods. I suggested we each pick tasks we felt strongly about. What if I handle the logistics, like packing and hiring movers, and you focus on, I don't know, making it feel like home once we're there? I offered, thinking this was a decent compromise. Riley frowned at me, looking a little offended. Making it feel like home? I want to do the logistics too. I just don't want to turn this into a military operation. I'm not trying to be the general here. I replied, feeling myself get defensive. But don't you think it'll be less stressful if we know exactly what's coming? And Riley sighed. That way they do when they're trying not to get frustrated. I think we'll just get bogged down in details if we try to micromanage this whole thing from day one. I'd rather take it step by step. First, we figure out where we're going to live, then we focus on the next thing. They seemed so sure, so relaxed about it. And the thing is, I wanted to be relaxed too. Riley makes a good point, in theory. Not everything has to be mapped out in advance. But this was more than just a weekend trip. We couldn't just wing it. There were real consequences if something fell through. Part of me envied their ability to trust that things would work out. Over the next few weeks, we kept hitting this same wall. I'd bring up the need to schedule an appointment with a realtor. Riley would counter that we should wait to see what kinds of neighborhoods we like first. When I suggested booking movers early, they shrugged, saying, "Let's wait a few more weeks. Prices might change." Each time I felt this mounting panic that we were running out of time to get everything perfect, and Riley could tell. They started making little efforts to help me feel more comfortable with their approach. One night, they set out 2 glasses of wine and a map of Seattle, saying, "Let's just dream for a bit. Imagine what our lives could look like." It was a nice gesture, and for a moment, I let myself get lost in the fantasy. Us exploring Pike Place, finding little coffee shops, strolling through green parks. But after a few minutes, that anxiety would creep back. Dreaming was nice, but without a plan, it felt unreal. Meanwhile, I tried to meet them halfway too. I'd loosened up on a few things, like the exact moving date and when we'd book a storage unit, just to show I wasn't trying to micromanage. But the uncertainty still ate at me. It wasn't just about control. It was about wanting to protect us both from any what-if that might pop up. Finally, we had another talk about it one night when we were up late, still surrounded by half-packed boxes and mismatched piles of things we'd promised to sort months ago. Riley took my hand and said, "Look, I know this isn't easy for you. I get that planning feels like the safe way to do this. But maybe this is a chance for us to learn to lean on each other differently." I stared at our hands, thinking, maybe they were right. I was clinging to control, not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't trust that anything unplanned would turn out okay. Riley has this way of rolling with life that I don't, and maybe I needed a little of that, even if it made me uncomfortable. "All right," I said, letting out a breath. "Let's try it your way for a bit." Riley beamed, but even as I said it, I felt the weight of every unmade plan pressing down. Could I really just let things happen? Could I let them have the reins without spiraling? In my mind, 1,000 scenarios whirled, each one whispering the worst-case consequences. But Riley squeezed my hand and smiled in that infuriatingly calm way they have. For once, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, they knew something I didn't. So here we are, balancing my list with their free-spirited approach. Both of us trying to support each other, even if neither can fully shake our own instincts. We're learning to compromise, even if neither of us feels entirely at ease. I'm still sneaking peeks at my spreadsheets when they're not looking, and Riley occasionally indulges my need to just double-check a few details. But the question nags at me. By pushing for my plan, am I just making things worse? Or is Riley's easygoing approach actually leaving us unprepared? A couple of months ago, my best friend Sarah finally landed a job that she had been dreaming about for years. She worked hard for it, late nights, endless job applications, and certifications galore. The role was with a big, respected company, and she was set to lead a small team in a project management position. We'd celebrated together when she got the offer, drinking champagne and making jokes about her big boss energy. Fast forward to her first week. Almost immediately, I started to notice cracks. We're close, like siblings, and we text every day. She would send me little updates about how the day was going. At first, it was excited messages like, "OMG, my team seems amazing," or "The office view is incredible." But soon, her text changed tone. By Friday, she was telling me things like, "I think my boss has it out for me already, and the team doesn't seem to take me seriously at all." I knew Sarah, and I knew her confidence. This wasn't like her. She was one of the most charismatic, dedicated people I knew, and people normally gravitated toward her. So I chalked it up to first-week jitters and told her to give it time. But the next week, things got worse. She called me almost every night, going off about how her team members were ignoring her instructions, how her boss wasn't giving her the support she needed, and how it seemed like no one respected her. "They treat me like I'm some intern who doesn't know what she's doing," she said one night, her voice teetering on the edge of tears. "It's like they're all just waiting for me to fail." I listened, sympathetic but worried. I could feel her stress bleeding through every word. Still, I didn't know what to say that might help. Sarah has a fierce personality. She can be intense, and if I'm honest, maybe a little stubborn. She's always been so sure of herself, so I thought maybe she just needed to vent and that things would settle. But they didn't. The calls continued, and her frustration mounted. She started talking about her team in pretty harsh terms, calling them useless and incompetent. She said she was going to go to her boss and demand that they shape up or let her start firing people. I could tell she was starting to lose her patience with everyone around her. And to be honest, it sounded off. Her stories about the team just didn't match up with the person I knew her to be. Someone who used to lead teams in her past jobs with tons of positive feedback. One night, after a particularly heated call, I knew I had to say something. I'd been watching her spiral for days, and I was genuinely worried that her stress would lead her to make a rash decision she'd regret. So I took a deep breath, choosing my words as carefully as possible. "Sarah, I know you're going through it, and it sounds incredibly frustrating," I said. "But do you think there's any chance that you're coming off a little too strong with him?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, and then she said, "What do you mean by that?" I hesitated but kept going, knowing I had to be honest if I wanted to help. "I just mean that maybe, since you're new, they need a bit more time to warm up to you. You're so passionate and ambitious, and I think sometimes people need a little time to match that energy, you know?" Her tone went ice cold. "So you think this is my fault?" No, I rushed to explain. "That's not what I mean at all. I'm just saying that maybe they're reacting to how intense you've been lately. Maybe if you showed them a little more patience, they'd respond differently." There was another long silence, and I felt my stomach drop. I could tell she was mad, but I couldn't read how mad. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight. "Wow, I didn't expect this from you. I thought you were on my side." "Sarah, I am on your side," I said, feeling desperate. "I just don't want you to make things harder for yourself if there's a chance that a different approach might help. I know how good you are at this, but maybe you think I'm the problem," she cut in sharply. "Just say it." My heart was racing, and I felt the familiar grip of anxiety tightening around me. I'd really hoped this would go differently. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just worried that they might not see you the way I do. I know you're amazing, but sometimes people need a little more time to see that, you know?" She laughed bitterly. "So now you think I'm intimidating them?" I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I hated this. I hated that trying to help her had turned into this fight. "I just want to help you, Sarah. That's all I'm trying to do here." "Well, thanks for the help, but I think I know how to handle my own job," she said curtly. And with that, she hung up. After that, things got weird between us. She stopped texting me about work altogether, and our conversations became stilted, awkward. I miss my friend, but every time I thought about reaching out, I felt the memory of that tense phone call creep back up, and I held back. I didn't want to risk upsetting her again. Then last week, I found out through mutual friends that she's seriously thinking about quitting her job. Apparently, things have continued going downhill, and she feels like it's an impossible environment. Part of me wonders if I should have just kept my mouth shut, let her vent without trying to steer her in any way. I wanted to protect her from herself, to save her from making a mistake, but now I'm left questioning whether I was out of line. I keep replaying that conversation, wondering if there was another way to say it that wouldn't have made her so defensive. I wonder if my attempt to help only made her feel more alone, and if maybe I should have just listened without offering any kind of advice. So now I'm left here, feeling like I let my best friend down when she needed support the most. Part of me still thinks I did the right thing by being honest, but the other part wonders if I just wasn't the friend she needed in that moment. So, here's the story of how my friendship with Tony spiraled, all over some borrowed money that neither of us can seem to handle right. A few months ago, Tony hit me up out of the blue with a favor to ask. He'd run into some financial trouble and needed a little extra cash to make ends meet. He didn't go into too many details, something about a car repair, late bills, and a temporary dry spell with his freelance gigs. I wasn't rolling in cash myself, but Tony's been one of my closest friends since college. The guy was practically family. So, I figured, what's a little cash between friends? He needed $600, which wasn't pocket change for me, but I thought, hey, he'd do the same for me if I needed it. Plus, he assured me that he'd pay it back real soon, which in Tony speak, I assumed meant within a month or two. We didn't write anything down. I just trusted that he'd come through. But here's where things started to get uncomfortable. A month rolled by, and I hadn't heard a peep about repayment. Tony was just as friendly as ever, always inviting me out to lunch or dropping by to chat. But whenever I hinted at the money, he'd brush it off, saying, "I got you, don't worry." I told myself to chill and be patient. Maybe he really was in a tight spot. Then I started noticing little things that irked me. He'd send me Snapchats from fancy-looking coffee shops, his cup with some intricate latte art, or shots of himself trying on clothes at the mall. I wouldn't have cared, except, well, this guy still owed me $600. How could he afford $6 lattes and a new leather jacket, but not even a partial payment toward the loan? I told myself I was being petty, but it gnawed at me. After 2 months, I'd had enough of the subtle reminders and just asked him outright, "Hey, Tony, do you know when you'll be able to pay me back?" He gave me a sort of annoyed look, like I was the one being weird, and said, "Dude, I'm working on it. You know things are tight." Right, but I hesitated, feeling uncomfortable even bringing it up. I could really use that money back soon. He sighed and said something about unexpected expenses, and how he's also just trying to live a little, you know? The phrase set me off because no, I didn't know. I was scraping by myself, forgoing stuff I'd normally buy because I was waiting for that $600 to come back. I felt stupid for even lending it to him, but I also felt trapped. I didn't want to be that friend who harps on about money all the time. After that, things got weird. I started noticing he was harder to reach. Texts left on read, missed calls, vague excuses about being busy whenever I tried to arrange a meetup. Our mutual friend started asking if Tony and I had had a fight because they hadn't seen us hanging out lately. I told them everything was fine, but truthfully, I was boiling inside. Then came the breaking point. We were at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, and it was the first time I'd seen him in weeks. I tried to be friendly and let things slide, but Tony just couldn't resist showing off. He ordered the most expensive cocktail on the menu, the kind that comes with a fancy name and an umbrella, and then went on to tell us about his latest self-care investment, which, as he put it, was a dope new massage chair. Everyone oohed and ahed, and I just sat there, practically biting my tongue. But after a few drinks, I couldn't hold it in. I turned to him, laughed bitterly, and said, "Guess that massage chair's really helping you save up to pay me back, huh?" The table went silent. Tony's face went blank, and our friends looked from him to me, clearly uncomfortable. Tony chuckled, trying to play it off, but I could see he was furious. After dinner, he pulled me aside and hissed, "Why would you embarrass me like that?" I told him it wasn't about embarrassing him. It was about finally getting the money back that he'd promised. He said something about me being way too uptight and needing to trust that he'll get it to me. When I asked when, he snapped, "I don't know, man, okay? I'm also struggling here." I couldn't believe it. Struggling? While he's out here getting $15 cocktails and $800 massage chairs. I told him as much, and he just rolled his eyes, saying, "It's just money, dude. Don't be so uptight." That's when it clicked. He genuinely thought I was being unreasonable. He was acting like he was entitled to my patience, as if my need for my own money was some kind of moral failing. I told him that he needed to grow up and face reality, but he just scoffed and walked away. Since then, we've barely spoken. I hear from mutual friends that he thinks I'm the one who overreacted, that I shouldn't lend money if I'm going to obsess over it. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here feeling like a sucker who tried to help a friend, only to end up being painted as some miser. I still haven't seen a dime, and honestly, I'm considering cutting him off for good over this. But then, part of me wonders if I was too pushy, or if I made things worse by calling him out in front of everyone. So, I was in charge of planning this family beach trip, right? My parents, my sister, her husband, their 2 kids, and me. I was the designated vacation organizer. Mostly because I'm the only one who won't cancel the entire trip just because the weather forecast isn't perfect. Everyone agreed I'd book the house, handle the logistics, all that stuff. Originally, we all settled on going to this beach about 3 hours away, a cute little place we'd been to before with a quiet shore, quaint seafood restaurants, and some hiking trails. The kids love the soft sand there. My mom loves the peaceful vibe, and my sister loves how Instagrammable everything is. I mean, it's fine, but honestly, it's a bit dull. I'd been there a dozen times already, and this was supposed to be my vacation, too, you know? So I started thinking about this new spot I'd heard about, a beach town with way more going on. There were bars right on the sand, a boardwalk with live music, even a small amusement park. Plus, the beach was known for surfing, and I just picked up surfing a few months ago. I thought, why not just switch things up a bit? It's not like we'll be missing anything life-changing by skipping the usual place. Without mentioning my little tweak to the plan, I went ahead and booked a rental house there instead. It wasn't like anyone had officially signed off on the boring beach, and besides, if they didn't like the new place, they could go to the regular beach any other time. We all only get one family vacation a year, so why not make it more interesting? I told everyone to pack their bags for our family beach trip, and we all piled into our cars to head out. I let them know on the way that the GPS would take a little longer than expected. "Oh, we're trying somewhere new this year," I announced cheerfully from the front seat of the caravan. There was a pause, and my sister asked, "What do you mean, somewhere new?" "Just a little beach town with a bit more to do," I replied. "More restaurants, a little boardwalk, fun stuff." Everyone sort of mumbled their okay, sure responses, but I could tell they didn't totally get it. Not yet. When we arrived, though, it was like I'd thrown them into the heart of Las Vegas. The beach was packed with people, and music was thumping from a DJ booth set up by the lifeguard station. My mom's eyes were the size of sand dollars, and she was clutching her beach hat like it might float away. My sister looked at me, her expression sour, and whispered, "This is not what we agreed on, like, at all." I brushed it off. "It's a beach. Same waves, same sun. I just thought we could try something a little less sleepy." "Come on, you guys can't tell me you're not a little curious to explore." At first, no one really said anything, but I could feel them fuming as we unloaded the car. My dad was grumbling about the crowds. My sister was stressed about how she'd keep an eye on her kids with so many people around. And my mom kept saying things like, "I thought we were going to that quiet beach," in this almost nostalgic tone. I reassured them they'd get used to it in no time. We just needed to unwind. I mean, it was still a beach, right? Then we got to the house. I thought it was a great place, 3 stories, right near the boardwalk with a wraparound deck that faced the water. But everyone else? They were less thrilled. My mom pointed out the lack of a yard. "Where are the kids supposed to play if they're not at the beach?" she asked. My sister looked at the steep stairs and gave me the "you've got to be kidding me" look. Her youngest, a 3-year-old, would need a watchful eye every second in a place like this. "Look, I get it, it's not the regular beach house," I said, trying to laugh it off. "But there are perks. There's an arcade on the boardwalk, and we can just walk to dinner instead of driving. Plus, there's live music every night." My sister wasn't buying it. "So, you basically switched the entire vacation location without even telling us?" "I've been telling the kids for weeks about the shells we'd collect. And now we're here, where there's practically concrete on the beach." "Concrete? It's sand." "There's still sand, Steph," I argued. "The beach is right there." I thought everyone would be excited to try something different for once. That's when my dad stepped in, looking more annoyed than I'd ever seen him. The whole point of going to the other beach was because it's quiet, and we can actually relax. This place is loud, crowded, and completely not what anyone expected. I was still thinking everyone was making a big deal out of nothing. I just thought you'd all like the convenience. And there's more for everyone to do here. We don't have to keep doing the same boring thing every year. But they weren't convinced. By the second day, everyone was miserable. My dad had locked himself in his room with a stack of crossword puzzles and a Bluetooth speaker blaring ocean sounds. My mom was sitting in the only quiet corner of the deck with a beach towel over her head, muttering about peace and quiet. My sister had her kids in tow the whole time, looking frazzled and exhausted from trying to keep them entertained in an area that was clearly not kid-friendly. Finally, at dinner one night, the whole thing exploded. My sister demanded to know why I hadn't just asked before changing the location. I explained my whole thought process, how I just wanted to shake things up a little, how I thought the original plan was too bland, and how I genuinely believed they'd all come to love this new place once they gave it a chance. My sister just stared at me, totally baffled. "But this wasn't your decision alone to make. It was supposed to be a family vacation, not a do-what-you-want-and-hope-we-had-just kind of trip." I was genuinely taken aback. I mean, I put in the effort, and I figured it would be fun for everyone. I didn't see the harm in a little surprise change. They were making it sound like I'd dragged them to some foreign country instead of just a different beach. "Look," I said, still trying to defend myself, "I just thought a livelier place would be better for everyone, especially for me. I mean, I put all the work into planning this." "Planning what?" My dad shot back. "It's like you planned a trip just for yourself and figured we'd all be fine with it. That's not what planning for a family means." That shut me up a little. I mean, okay, maybe I didn't exactly take everyone's preferences into account, but it was just a beach, right? Now we're back, and everyone's still a bit frosty with me. They keep saying I ruined a family vacation by being selfish, but honestly, I just thought a more active beach would be a nice change of pace. We're all supposed to be able to relax and have fun, right? I just wanted us to have fun my way. I still think they're blowing it out of proportion. Last Saturday, I decided to do something special for my best friend, Jake. He'd been going through a rough time lately, stressed at work, broke after an expensive move, and still nursing a breakup from 6 months ago. He'd become a shell of his usual easygoing self, spending most of his free time alone and hardly making it out to socialize. I missed my friend, so I thought I'd surprise him with a cheer-up day. Nothing over the top, just a plan where he wouldn't have to think. Just show up, relax, and let me take care of everything. I put a lot of thought into it. Jake loves cars, so I booked us an afternoon at a car exhibition in the city featuring a bunch of vintage models he was always talking about. I figured we'd go there, take some cool photos, then grab food at a little pub he loves, where the bartender knows us by name and sneaks us extra fries. After that, I even planned for us to hit up this new arcade bar that just opened up downtown. Jake used to be crazy about those vintage arcade games back in college, and I thought a night of that nostalgia might be just the distraction he needed. I was so excited about this plan, and honestly, I felt proud of myself for coming up with something I knew he'd love. But here's where things started to go off track. When I picked Jake up and told him the plan, he just gave me this look. Not angry, not disappointed, just flat, like I'd told him we were going grocery shopping. "Thanks, man, but I'm just not in the mood for all this," he said. I could hear the reluctance in his voice, but I was so sure he'd have fun if he just gave it a chance. So I nudged him a bit, saying, "Come on, dude, just go with it. I thought you'd love this. Vintage cars, good food, old games. What's not to like?" He sighed, but he got in the car, and I thought maybe he just needed a little warming up. But when we got to the car show, he was mostly quiet, scrolling on his phone while I pointed out the cars he'd usually rave about. I kept trying to make conversation, talking up a '69 Mustang I thought he'd be excited to see, but he just nodded absently, mumbling, "Yeah, cool." By this point, I was starting to feel like I'd dragged him there against his will, but I'd already made the arrangements and reservations, so I thought, let's at least make it to the pub. Maybe he was just hangry, right? At the pub, he perked up a bit, probably because the bartender, Ryan, brought over some beers and didn't even bother charging us for them. But when I asked if he was having a good time, Jake sighed again and said, "Look, it's cool you set this up, but I just feel like you're not getting it. I need downtime, not some force fun day. This whole thing feels more like something you wanted to do." Ouch! It stung to hear that, but I stayed calm and tried to explain. "I thought you'd enjoy this stuff, man, that's all. I didn't mean to make it feel forced. I just wanted to do something good for you, you know? Show you a good time." He just shrugged, looking kind of annoyed. "But did you even think about asking me if I wanted to go out today? Or did you just assume I'd be up for it?" I felt a flash of frustration. I'd put hours into organizing this day, getting tickets, coordinating the schedule, booking the tables. I didn't understand how he could be so dismissive of the effort. But I took a breath and tried to keep my cool. "I thought if I told you, you'd feel pressure to go along with it," I explained. "I didn't want to put that on you. I just wanted you to have a break without worrying." He shook his head, and then he actually laughed, which caught me off guard. But it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind that hurts. "See? You didn't think about what I needed. You just assumed you knew best." Now I felt anger bubbling up under the hurt. "I've been watching you practically isolate yourself for months," I said, my voice shaking a little. "You barely leave your apartment. You're miserable all the time, and I was just trying to make you feel like yourself again. Sorry if that came off wrong, but I don't know what else to do when my best friend's in a slump and won't tell me what's wrong." He didn't answer, just looked at me with a blank expression, and then, in the most condescending tone, he said, "Maybe next time, try being there without trying to fix everything. Not everyone needs a grand gesture, all right?" I felt my face go hot, and I swallowed hard, trying not to snap. But everything I'd planned, every bit of effort, was crumbling in front of me. All I'd wanted was to see him happy, but he was making it sound like I'd pushed him into some fun parade for my own kicks. I decided to cut the day short after that. I drove him home, mostly in silence, with his passive-aggressive jabs about how I shouldn't take it personally. The thing is, it was personal. I wasn't some random guy dragging him to an event. I was his best friend, the person who'd been worried about him. But somehow, everything I'd done out of concern had turned into some selfish move in his eyes. By the time I dropped him off, I felt exhausted both physically and emotionally. Jake got out without a word of thanks. just to see you around, and shut the door. I watched him walk into his building and disappear, feeling like the world's worst friend for trying to make him feel better. I know he's going through something, but I can't shake this feeling that I was treated unfairly. I cared enough to try, to put in effort when I didn't have to try to lift him out of his funk because he means that much to me. And yet, he acted like I'd done it all just for myself, like I was too dense to understand what he really needed. So here I am, wondering, did I overstep? Or did I just try to be a good friend and get blamed for it? So, last Saturday, my cousin Claire threw this little get-together to celebrate her promotion. She's now a senior manager in her department, and everyone in the family's been raving about it nonstop. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for her and everything. But after a week of hearing my aunt gush on Facebook about her brilliant daughter, I was about ready to burst. I mean, Claire's job is in HR for some mid-sized insurance company. Not exactly Silicon Valley, you know? Anyway, I thought it was harmless enough to throw out a few casual comments during the party. My family has always been big on sharing our journeys, so I figured I'd bring up my own career path, just a light comparison to give the conversation a little more depth. After all, I'm working as a project lead in a tech startup, and trust me, the grind is real. It's not one of those cushy jobs where you sit around all day interviewing people or handling office disputes. I have actual deadlines, million-dollar budgets to manage, and let's just say the pressure of my job is in a whole different league. So, there I was chatting with my aunt and a few others, and I slipped in a line like, I think it's amazing Claire got the promotion, but she's lucky HR isn't like project management. In my field, if you mess up, it's visible to everyone. It's real high-stakes stuff. I was just trying to add some context to show how different jobs come with different kinds of challenges. Nothing I said was untrue. My job is a lot more intense, and I have to stay up to date with cutting-edge tech. That's not something everyone could handle. Claire overheard me and gave me this weird look, so I clarified, it's just that HR is more of a stable field. Not to knock what you're doing, but it's not like we're talking life or death decisions here. I chuckled, hoping she'd see the humor. She sort of shrugged and moved on, so I thought she understood. Come on, her job is super secure, and in my field, people are getting laid off left and right if they don't perform. That's just the truth. The night went on, and I somehow ended up in a conversation with her brother, Chris, who's in law school. I'll give him credit. Law school is intense, but it's also his only focus. He doesn't have to juggle a full-time job while getting his degree, so I couldn't help but mention how back in the day, I was working nearly full-time and studying for my own certification exams. I said, "It's great that you can just focus on school, Chris. I remember when I had to balance a job and study at the same time. Makes you a little more resilient, I think." He gave me a tight smile, but hey, I was just sharing my experience. It's not like I was saying his path was any less valid. I just wanted to give some perspective on how different situations build different strengths. My mom overheard and joined in, mentioning how she's always admired my work ethic. That was nice to hear, and I figured it just reinforced my point. I wasn't saying anyone else had it easy, but let's be real, some people's paths are more challenging. Eventually, I moved to a conversation with my friend, Sarah, who'd stopped by. She's been working with her dad at a small business, and she was telling me how she's been putting in long hours, trying to expand the company. Again, I'm genuinely happy for her, but I couldn't resist pointing out the obvious. I told her, "That's great that you're taking on more responsibilities, but I'd kill for that kind of family support. I had to build my career without anyone giving me a leg up. Everything I've accomplished was 100% on my own." Sarah's face dropped, and she got all quiet. I tried to ease the tension by laughing it off. "I'm just saying, it's a different kind of grind, Some of us have to claw our way up from the bottom." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled. I chalked it up to her just not getting it. The evening wrapped up, and as I was saying my goodbyes, Claire pulled me aside. She looked upset, which surprised me because, honestly, I hadn't said anything that wasn't true. She started off saying, "Look, I know you work hard and you've done great things, but tonight it felt like you were downplaying everything anyone else has accomplished. It was like no matter what any of us have done, it's never going to measure up to your standards." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain my side. "I'm just telling it like it is, Claire. It's not about standards. I'm simply sharing my perspective. I've had a different experience, and it's not a competition. But you can't deny that my path has been harder. I didn't have job security like you, or someone to lean on like Sarah, or a free pass to focus on studies like Chris. Claire sighed. That's the problem. You keep saying it's not a competition, but every time we talk about something we've done, you feel the need to one-up us or put a qualifier on it. Do you realize how that makes us feel? That one took me by surprise. I hadn't thought about it like that. But honestly, what was I supposed to do? Pretend like we're all dealing with the same level of challenges when we're clearly not. I tried to explain that I just wanted to show how proud I was of what I'd achieved, especially considering the extra hurdles I'd faced. But she didn't seem interested in hearing my side, just muttered something about always making it about you before walking away. On the drive home, I kept replaying the night in my head, trying to figure out if I'd actually done something wrong or if everyone was just being overly sensitive. My mom had said she was proud of me, and it's not like I said anything factually incorrect. We do all have different paths, and my path was harder. I'm just being realistic. So now I'm left wondering, was I out of line? I mean, maybe I could have phrased things differently, but is it really wrong to share my honest perspective? I was just trying to bring some balance to the conversation. My cousin Danny has always been what I'd call a serial achiever. He's the type who goes all out for everything. First in high school track, summa cum laude in college, endless photos of awards, medals, certificates on his Instagram. And look, I'm not here to bash that. Good for him. But by now, the constant celebrations and achievements have started to feel like background noise to me. So when he texted me 3 months ago saying he'd pass his bar exam, I barely reacted. I mean, great. He became a lawyer, but that's what he went to school for, right? You study, you pass, you become a lawyer. No surprises there. He didn't invent a vaccine or discover a new planet. He just did what's expected when you follow that path. To me, it was one of those cool story bro moments where you nod and keep scrolling. I tossed him a thumbs up emoji with a congrats. I figured it was polite, and anyway, what else is there to say? Then came the invitation. I'll give Danny credit. He had a way with words when he wanted. The text was some long, heartfelt note about how much the support of family meant to him, and how he'd be hosting a small dinner to celebrate finally making it through law school, studying for the bar, and starting his legal career. He dropped phrases like an honor to have you there and grateful for everyone who stood by me. I remember reading it and thinking, really? Dinner for passing an exam? It just didn't strike me as that big a deal. My own job didn't throw me a party when I hit my 1-year mark, and that took a lot of work too. So yeah, maybe I was a little cynical, but I just didn't see the need for everyone to get all misty-eyed because he finally did what he's been going on about for years. And the kicker? The dinner was on a Thursday in the middle of the work week, about an hour's drive away. The thought of slogging out of the city after a long day, dealing with traffic, spending an evening with Danny's lawyer friends talking about cases I didn't care about, and then dragging myself back home late. It sounded exhausting. So I decided I'd sit this one out. I figured it would be fine. He has plenty of family. He'd still have a crowd, and I assumed he'd understand. I didn't even think twice about my decision until a couple days later, when Danny's sister, Beth, messaged me. Hey, are you really not coming to the dinner? She asked. I brushed it off, saying something like, oh, it's on a work night, you know? I don't want to be the zombie cousin who falls asleep in his soup. Beth replied with a quick, okay, just thought you'd be there since you and Danny used to be close. I could practically feel her guilt trip through the phone, but I pushed it aside. I mean, we used to be close, sure, but we hadn't hung out regularly in years. People drift, especially when life gets busy. It didn't mean I didn't care. I just didn't see the need to drop everything for this. I figured he'd see it the same way. A couple of days later, I scrolled through my feed and saw some pictures from the dinner. I have to admit, it looked more heartfelt than I'd expected. There was Danny, grinning from ear to ear, hugging his mom, raising a glass with his dad. His friends from law school were there, Beth and her husband, some aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in ages, all toasting and clapping as Danny made some speech. For a moment, I felt a tiny pang of something, maybe guilt, but I shrugged it off. I figured Danny had plenty of people to celebrate with him. About a week after the dinner, I got a text from Danny that threw me for a loop. Hey, just wanted to ask, why didn't you come? My first thought was, wow, he's really making a thing out of this? But I could sense from his text that he wasn't joking around. I took a deep breath and typed back, hey man, congrats again on passing. I had work the next day and didn't want to mess with my schedule. But I'm proud of you. For a while, There was no response, and I thought he'd let it go. But then he hit back with, "I just thought it'd mean something to you to be there." It was kind of a big night for me, you know? I felt a flicker of irritation. Here he was, trying to make me feel bad for not showing up to his big night. I thought about ignoring it, but I decided to respond honestly. "Danny, it's not like you were getting married. You're a lawyer now, sure, but it's just a job. Everyone has to work for a living. I didn't think you'd be so upset over something so minor." I didn't expect the reaction I got. Danny went silent for a while, and then he just unloaded on me. He said something about how he'd spent years working himself to the bone, trying to build a life that would make his family proud, and how hard he'd been working to get through school, the bar, everything. He talked about all the late nights, the times he thought he'd fail, the fact that he rarely felt like he was enough, even though he was working nonstop to get there. He said he'd invited me because I'd been one of the only people who actually understood him growing up, and he thought it would be meaningful to have me there. To him, my absence wasn't just a scheduling conflict. It felt personal, like I didn't care about him or his accomplishments. I was honestly stunned. I'd never seen this side of him. I guess I'd always pictured Danny as the golden child who had it all together. I didn't think he'd ever need me to be his cheerleader. And as harsh as it sounds, I felt like he was being a little dramatic. It was an exam, not an Olympic medal or a Pulitzer Prize. I tried to tell him that, but he just kept saying how much it hurt that I wasn't there. We ended the conversation on a tense note. He hasn't texted me since, and Beth's been cool with me, too. Not quite ignoring me, but definitely acting distant. The whole thing feels ridiculous, but now I'm wondering if maybe I missed something. Did I underestimate how much this meant to him? Or is he blowing this way out of proportion? I really didn't think skipping a dinner would turn into all this drama. But here we are. AITA? So, my partner, Jamie, and I have been planning this dream trip to Italy for months. It was supposed to be our first real adventure together. Just the two of us, exploring Tuscany, Rome, Venice, you name it. We've both been saving up, sharing Pinterest boards, and sending each other food pics to hype each other up for all the pasta, wine, and picturesque sunsets we'd be basking in. But somehow along the way, Jamie seemed to go from, "Hey, let's brainstorm ideas," to, "I'm going to take the wheel here, because clearly you don't know what you want." Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciated the enthusiasm at first. Jamie's always been a bit of a planner, while I'm more go with the flow. But what started as an occasional suggestion snowballed into Jamie designing an entire itinerary, without even asking for my input. We're talking about a Google Doc color-coded by day, timestamped to the minute. Jamie had booked us on early morning tours, high-energy excursions, and even some cooking classes. I love Italian food as much as the next person, but 4-hour cooking classes? At 8 a.m.? That's not what I had in mind when I pictured a relaxing trip. When I first brought up my discomfort, Jamie brushed it off with a smile and said, "Trust me, you'll love it. I know you say you're easygoing, but that just means you'll have fun with whatever I plan." At the time, I let it slide, figuring it wasn't worth a fight. Besides, maybe Jamie was right. Maybe having a tight schedule would help us see and do more. But as the trip grew closer, that tightness started feeling like a chokehold. Fast forward to a week before our departure. I was double-checking everything Jamie had planned, just to mentally prepare myself. And that's when I realized that every single thing on the itinerary was something Jamie wanted to do. The wineries, the art museums, the bike tour across the countryside. All things Jamie had raved about, but I hadn't even given an opinion on. Meanwhile, all my casual mentions of beach days, lazy afternoons, or just wandering around were nowhere to be found. It hit me then, Jamie hadn't just ignored my preferences. Jamie had bulldozed over them. I confronted Jamie that night. "Look, I don't mind doing some of the tours, but this whole thing is just a lot. I'd like some downtime, some unplanned days. This is supposed to be our trip, not your solo itinerary with me as your sidekick." Jamie sighed and rolled their eyes. "Okay, but what's wrong with having a plan? You'd just wander around aimlessly if I didn't organize things. We'd waste half the trip deciding what to do." "That's the point," I said, maybe a bit louder than I intended. "Wandering around is half the fun. This isn't a corporate retreat, Jamie. I don't need a PowerPoint for how to spend my time in Italy." Jamie's expression hardened. "So what? You want me to just cancel everything I booked? Waste all the effort I put in?" The thing was, yes, maybe I did want that. Or at least, I wanted Jamie to acknowledge that they'd taken over without including me. But that didn't happen. Jamie just kept insisting that they knew what was best, like I was too immature or clueless to understand my own travel preferences. It felt like the only way to get through to them was to show them what it felt like. So, when Jamie went to work the next morning, I pulled up the Google Doc, deleted every single event, and put in my own version. I made each day a blank slate with maybe 1 or 2 suggested activities, like find a cool cafe or see if we can book a beach day. I didn't even save the original itinerary. Just wiped it completely. I sent Jamie a text. Hey, I updated the itinerary. I think it's a bit more balanced now. I waited, practically vibrating with anticipation and a bit of petty glee. It took a while for Jamie to respond, and when they did, it was with a phone call. What? Did you? Jamie asked, voice low and trembling. I made it more relaxed, like we talked about. I said, trying to keep my tone light like this was no big deal. Now we can both have a say each day. Oh, so you just erased everything I planned? Jamie's voice went up, incredulous. I spent weeks putting that together. I booked tickets for things. Do you know how hard it is to get a reservation at that vineyard? I rolled my eyes even though they couldn't see me. Jamie, it was a wine tasting. I'm sure we'll survive if we miss one. Jamie's silence was heavy. Then they said, I can't believe you did this. I was trying to make it special for us. But special for us is different from special for you, I shot back. Why can't you see that? We went back and forth like this, each digging our heels in deeper, until finally Jamie said, you know what? If you can't handle a little structure, maybe I'll just go by myself. At least that way, I won't have to worry about you sulking over too much planning. Oh, is that so? I said, my voice thick with sarcasm. Fine, you know what? Maybe you should. Go on your planned-to-the-minute trip without me. Have a blast with your damn vineyard reservations and 6 a.m. wake-up calls. I'm sure you'll love it. Jamie hung up. I thought they might cool off, but 2 hours later, I got a text. Flight refunded. Go to your unplanned wandering solo. I didn't respond, mostly because I was floored. I mean, yes, I'd been angry, but canceling everything? Jamie had been so wrapped up in being right that they actually just gave up on the whole trip rather than trying to compromise. And I was too stubborn to say, fine, let's just do it your way. Now I'm sitting here with 2 weeks off work, no Italy trip, and a half-packed suitcase mocking me from the corner of my room. And as much as I feel justified in wanting a say in how we spent our time together, I can't help but wonder if I took it too far. I'd had Tilly for over a decade, a little fur ball of stubbornness wrapped in whiskers and soft gray fur. I got her when I was 20, just scraping by, feeling unsure of almost everything in life except for one thing. This scrawny kitten that fit in the palm of my hand was staying with me, no matter what. Tilly had grown up with me, through relationships, job changes, new cities, breakups, and finally meeting Evan, my partner of the last 4 years. And here we were, facing a decision I never thought we'd have to make. 2 weeks ago, I found a lump on Tilly's side. I thought it was just a cyst or a benign bump, but the vet's face got serious as she examined it. After a series of tests, she confirmed what I had dreaded, cancer. It was aggressive, but the vet said there was a chance we could treat it with surgery and chemo. It's going to be a long road, she said gently, and it won't be easy for her, but she's otherwise healthy. I instantly wanted to go for it. I mean, she was Tilly. I'd always believed she was stronger than her 10-pound frame suggested, like she'd been given the heart of a tiger. I was ready to do anything to give her a chance, even if it meant draining my savings and rearranging my schedule. But Evan looked uncertain, and when we got home that night, he was quiet, staring into his coffee like it had answers. Finally, he sighed, looking over at me. Are you sure about this? Yes, I said without hesitation. We have to try. She's been with me for almost my whole adult life. Evan nodded slowly, and then he spoke, his voice low. I know, but I worry about her suffering through all of this. He hesitated, looking like he didn't want to say it. I don't want her to go through all that pain if there's only a small chance she'll pull through. I felt my chest tighten. But it's a chance, Evan. Isn't that worth something? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It's worth a lot. I get that. I love her too, you know. But chemo? Radiation? The surgery itself? I don't know if it's right to put her through that. We went back and forth for days. Each of us pored over research, reading studies and testimonials from people who'd been through this with their pets. He showed me articles about the toll that chemotherapy can take on animals, the ways it could drain them of energy, make them lose their appetite, their strength. I read stories of animals who survived and had extra years with their families, who beat the odds and went back to chasing toys and sunbathing on windowsills. It felt like we were caught in an endless loop of what-ifs, spiraling between hope and dread. One night, after a long silence at the dinner table, Evan reached out and covered my hand with his. "I don't want to sound cruel," he said softly, "but Tilly, she can't tell us if she's ready to fight. We're making that call for her, and I'm scared we're not hearing her." "But she's a fighter, Evan," I almost shouted. "You know she is. You saw how she bounced back when she got that respiratory infection last winter. Everyone thought she was done for, but she proved them wrong." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I remember. But you know, chemo and surgery, they're not just a rough patch. They're going to be a whole different experience for her. And she's older now." I was silent, my mind swimming with memories of Tilly's bright green eyes, her stubborn purr that would rumble louder when she was feeling defiant. I couldn't imagine life without that sound, without her curling up next to me every night. My voice cracked as I whispered, I can't picture saying goodbye. Not yet." Evan's face softened, and he pulled me into his arms. "I know," he murmured. "I can't either. She's family. I just wish we had a clearer way to know what she'd want." The next morning, we called the vet again to talk about the logistics of the surgery. She was patient, explaining each step of the process, the potential complications, and what recovery would look like. At the end, she paused. "This isn't an easy decision," she said kindly. "You're both clearly doing everything you can to do right by her, and that's all anyone can ask." Later that evening, Evan and I sat down on the living room floor, watching Tilly bat lazily at a piece of string. She looked frail to me suddenly, her coat thinner than I'd noticed, her paws moving slowly, like she was just humoring us by playing. But when she looked up at me, her eyes still held that spark, that quiet stubbornness I'd seen so many times. I felt like she was saying, "I'm still here. I'm not done." Evan reached over, scratching her behind her ears, and looked at me. "Okay," he said quietly. "If you think she's ready for this fight, then let's try. But if it starts looking like too much for her, if it's hurting her more than helping, we have to be prepared to stop." I nodded, tears spilling over as relief and guilt crashed into each other inside me. "I promise, I whispered. If she shows us she's not okay, we'll let her go. But we have to at least try." We scheduled the surgery, and in the days leading up to it, I spent every moment I could with Tilly. I slept on the couch beside her, trying to memorize the feel of her fur under my fingers, the way she'd push her head into my hand for more pets, her purr louder than ever. Evan joined me most nights, his head resting on my shoulder as we watched her sleep. The day of the surgery came, and I walked her into the vet's office, heart hammering, my throat too tight to speak. Evan held my hand as we waited, not saying much, just squeezing my fingers every few minutes. When the vet finally called us in, she gave us a small, encouraging smile. "She's a tough one," she said, "and you're doing everything you can for her." The surgery went as well as we could have hoped, but the weeks after were grueling. There were days when I questioned everything, when Tilly wouldn't eat or would just lie there, seeming too exhausted to move. I broke down more than once, and Evan was there, silently handing me tissues and wrapping his arms around me. He never said, "I told you so," but I knew he was still worried. Somehow, though, Tilly pushed through. Slowly, she started perking up, her appetite came back, and one day, she even hopped up onto the couch beside me, something she hadn't done in weeks. It felt like a miracle. Evan watched her, a soft smile on his face. "She really is a fighter," he murmured, rubbing her chin. I smiled back, feeling a weight lift that I'd been carrying since the diagnosis. But the doubts linger, even now. I can't help but wonder if I forced her into this for me more than for her. I look at her and worry that we're just prolonging the inevitable, that we've made a choice that's more about keeping my heart from breaking than about her well-being. And I know Evan feels the same way, that this will always be a decision we second-guess. even if she's here with us now. So, was I selfish to put her through this? So, this story starts on a Tuesday. One of those quiet, unassuming days where I thought the biggest challenge I'd face was figuring out if I wanted takeout or leftovers for dinner. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was my cousin Amanda who pulled me into it. She called in a panic about her internet being down, and since she's notorious for her tech meltdowns, I didn't think much of it at first. I drove over, coffee in hand, fully prepared for her usual password reset mess or the dreaded, I think I deleted the internet call. Amanda and I had always been close. Our moms are sisters, so growing up, she was more like a sibling. I was the tech-savvy cousin, so it wasn't unusual for her to reach out. When I got there, though, I knew something was different. She greeted me with red-rimmed eyes, a bit of a deer-in-headlights look that stopped me in my tracks. I gently asked if she was okay, and she brushed it off with a quick, "It's just been a rough day, you know?" I figured maybe it was work stress. She had a pretty demanding job in HR, but I didn't pry. I got to work on her Wi-Fi, silently, giving her space. While I waited for her router to reboot, I caught sight of some papers scattered on her dining table. And look, I'm not usually one to snoop, but there was this one page that had her name printed at the top, next to the bold letters "Final Notice." It was like a neon sign flashing urgent in my mind. I couldn't help it. I squinted at the heading. It was a foreclosure notice. The gears in my brain started clicking together. Amanda had recently bought that condo. She'd saved for years, working crazy hours, barely taking a break. I couldn't imagine she'd be so behind on her mortgage. How could it have gotten this bad without her saying a word? Suddenly, her stress and the signs of worry made sense. And honestly, I just wanted to help. She's family. When I finished fixing her Wi-Fi, I asked, as gently as I could, "Hey, are you doing okay with the condo stuff?" I saw the papers. It looked pretty serious. I'd hoped she'd feel relieved, maybe even tell me everything now that it was out in the open. But her face turned a shade darker, her eyes narrowing. "What, are you spying on me now?" she snapped. Her voice was sharp, like a slap in the face. "I called you over to fix my Wi-Fi, not to dig through my personal business." No, I wasn't snooping. I tried to explain, tripping over my words. I just happened to see the notice, and I thought maybe I could help. She folded her arms, looking away. "You think I don't know how to handle my own finances? You think I'm some charity case?" I could feel my face heat up, part embarrassment, part frustration. "Amanda, I didn't mean it like that. You just seem, I don't know, you looked upset. I care about you. If there's something you need, anything at all, I just want you to know I'm here." She laughed, but it wasn't her usual laugh. This one was cold, bitter. "Yeah, well, thanks, but I don't need you swooping in to save me." She practically spat the words, making air quotes with her fingers. "This is why I don't tell people anything. You give someone an inch, and they think they have a right to poke around your life." I stood there, feeling like I just walked into a wall. My chest hurt like someone had kicked the air out of me. I thought I was being a good cousin, but apparently I'd overstepped in a way I didn't even understand. Amanda looked away, arms crossed tightly, an unspoken wall going up between us. I didn't know what else to say, so I mumbled a quick, "sorry," and left her standing there in her living room, staring me down with a look I hadn't seen since we were kids and she'd found out I'd told her secret crush she liked him. On the drive home, I replayed it all in my head, wondering where I went wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned the foreclosure notice. But honestly, how could I have ignored it? I wasn't trying to meddle. I was just worried. That's all. And seeing her so defensive, so angry at me for caring, hit harder than I expected. I wanted to reach out and make things right, but every text I drafted sounded worse than the one before it. I knew if I pushed now, it would only make things uglier. I wanted her to know she wasn't alone. I didn't want her to feel embarrassed or like she had to struggle in silence. But maybe she saw it as me questioning her ability to handle things on her own, and that must have stung, even if that was the last thing I intended. Now I'm left second-guessing myself, wondering if I should have just kept my mouth shut and let her handle it on her terms, no matter the fallout. So, my friend Ava and I had this great idea to throw an epic New Year's Eve party. You know, the kind where everyone talks about it well into next year. It started as one of those impulsive plans over brunch. Ava was already halfway through her mimosa when she said, Let's make this one for the books. And honestly, I was all in. We've been talking about doing something cool and memorable together for ages, and this felt perfect. From the start, we decided to split the workload. Ava would handle the decorations, music, and overall vibe, while I would take care of the food, drinks, and coordinating with people. It seemed pretty straightforward. At least, that's how it felt in that slightly buzzed state where everything seems easy. But here's where things started to drift. A couple of days went by, and I didn't hear much from her. I figured she was handling things on her end, so I let it go, assuming I could trust her to get it all in place. Meanwhile, work got insane for me. I was practically living in my office, and honestly, planning a party was the last thing on my mind at the end of each long day. I thought, Ava's got it covered. She's the details person here anyway. And that's when my laziness really kicked in. I figured I could throw together some snack platters from Costco, maybe pick up some beer and wine at the last minute, and it would still be fine. In the back of my mind, I was totally confident that Ava was probably handling the music playlist and decor, ordering things online, and mapping out the whole event vibe. I'd see her occasional posts about setting the mood or making it cozy for NY, and it reinforced my assumption that she was going all out. Fast forward to New Year's Eve. Ava and I decided to meet up at the rental house we'd booked. I got there around 6, walking in with a couple of bags of chips, some salsa, and a few cases of beer. I looked around expecting, fairy lights, balloons, maybe a disco ball. But the place was bare, like not even a single stream of party decorations. Just an empty living room with some scattered chairs. Ava was standing there with this look on her face that mirrored exactly what I was feeling. Oh crap. Immediately, we both went into panic mode. I asked her, "Where's all the stuff? Didn't you set up anything?" She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "I thought you were taking care of things. You said you'd handle the food and drinks, and well, everything else." "Everything else?" I spluttered. "Ava, you said you'd cover the decor and atmosphere. I thought you'd have, at least some lights or something." She just stared at me for a second, and then snapped back. "Well, I can't do everything. You should have told me if you wanted something specific." Her tone was almost accusing, like somehow this mess was all my fault. I shot back. "If you knew I was swamped at work, why didn't you double check? Like, maybe ask if I had it handled?" Her eyes flared. "Oh, so this is my fault now? I didn't know I had to micromanage you just because you can't get your stuff together." At this point, we were getting loud. The first couple of guests had already started arriving, early of course, because that's what people do when you're running behind. And the place was, well, embarrassing. People walked in expecting a party, but there we were, looking like two angry parents fighting at a PTA meeting. I could see the awkward glances as they entered, clearly wondering if they should have found another place to celebrate. Ava and I kept sparring in whispers while trying to act natural in front of the guests, but the vibe was awful. The two of us were passive-aggressively grabbing whatever we could find to throw together last-minute snacks, frantically scrolling through our phones to play a random playlist that absolutely didn't fit the vibe, and trying to act like this was all some kind of low-key, relaxed party theme. No one bought it. By 10 o'clock, most people had left, some clearly disappointed, and a few others just looking like they'd never speak to either of us again. When I finally turned to Ava, hoping to maybe smooth things over, she just sighed, shaking her head. I thought we were a team. I thought we were both going to put effort into this. That stung. I knew she was disappointed in me, and to be honest, I was too. But I also couldn't help feeling like she let me down by not following up or stepping up when she realized I might be slacking. I was hurt, frustrated, and at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. We packed up the last of the snacks in silence, each of us too bitter to even say goodbye. I can't stop thinking about it. I know I was lazy, but I also feel like she's just as responsible. If she had put in even a little more effort, we could have salvaged something halfway decent, right? Or maybe I'm just deflecting. AITA? I never thought a job offer would throw my life off balance like this. I knew this one was big, a high-profile position, more money than I'd ever made, an actual path to advancement. And sure, it came with a catch. I'd have to move halfway across the country, away from everything and everyone I know, starting with my sister, Lily. Lily and I have always been tight. We grew up just the two of us in a tiny town, doing our best to survive a rocky home life. Lily is my other half in so many ways. She knows everything about me. including stuff I've never told anyone else. And I thought she'd be the first person to celebrate when I got the offer from New York City. But when I brought it up to her, her face fell immediately. "So, what does that mean?" she asked, eyebrows scrunching up, though she was clearly trying to keep her voice steady. I took a breath. "It means I'd be moving to New York, probably within a month. I know it's fast, but wait, what? So you're just leaving?" Her voice cracked, and I could tell she wasn't trying to make me feel guilty, but the disappointment in her voice was like a punch to the gut. I thought we were going to stay close, like no matter what. I put a hand on her arm, wishing I had the right words to make it okay. "Lil, it's just the chance of a lifetime. You know how long I've been waiting for something like this. I've been working 2 jobs, hustling nonstop, just hoping something like this would come through. Yeah, but we're all we have here. You're my family, and I don't want to lose that," she said softly, looking down. "It's not that I don't get it. I do, but I don't know how I'd deal with you being gone. Lily's my little sister, but she's a rock for me. I guess she thinks of me the same way. When we were kids, I used to take her on late-night drives to get milkshakes when things got rough at home. We'd escape together, just for a little while, driving down country roads and imagining lives far from our reality. For her, those nights still meant freedom and security. Leaving felt like breaking a promise we'd made long ago. But New York felt like the place I needed to be, a place where I could finally spread my wings and make a name for myself. I'd worked for this. I deserved this. But seeing the pain in her eyes made me wonder if I was being selfish. I felt pulled in 2 directions, each pulling hard enough that I felt like I'd snap. We sat in silence for a while, the TV playing some forgettable show in the background. I finally turned to her, my chest tight. "What would you need from me if I took this job?" She sighed, her fingers tracing circles on the couch cushion. "I don't know," she whispered. "Just not to be completely alone." That hit hard. Lily had never needed anyone, not even me. She was the type to handle her own stuff. Fiercely independent, but also a little closed off. For her to say that told me this hurt her more than I'd realized. "Lil," I said, reaching for her hand, "this doesn't have to change things. I'll come home as much as I can. You can visit. It'll be new, but it doesn't mean we're losing each other." Her eyes softened, but her jaw was still tight. "It won't be the same, though. It's always been us against the world. And now you're leaving, and I just have to be okay with it." I didn't know what to say. She wasn't wrong. I'd be lying if I said everything would be the same. But the idea of turning down this job was unthinkable. I'd worked so hard for it. How could I walk away? Then Lily surprised me. "I get it. I know how hard you've worked, and I know you deserve this. I need time, I think, to wrap my head around it. And maybe, if you're going to do this, maybe we can make a plan? Something that keeps us connected." It was a lifeline. "Of course. What do you need? Weekly calls? Regular visits? I'll be here whenever you need me." She nodded slowly. "Okay, maybe we do weekly video calls, and you come home for the big stuff? Birthdays, holidays, the important things." My heart lifted a bit, knowing she was trying, even though I could still see the sadness lingering in her eyes. I knew how it felt too, because saying goodbye to the only family I really had was tearing me up inside, even if I didn't want to show it. But what was the alternative? Staying here, grinding away at a dead-end job, watching more opportunities slip through my fingers, wondering if this was all my life would amount to? It wasn't fair to Lily, but it wasn't fair to me either. She reached out, taking my hand. "You should take it. This job. Just don't forget about me, okay?" I pulled her in for a hug, and we held each other, silent but understanding. She didn't need to say it, but I knew. I was leaving more than just a hometown. I was leaving a part of our shared past. But I couldn't deny what I felt, that same drive that had pushed me through years of schooling and long nights at work. I wanted more for myself, even if it meant making a choice that hurt the person I loved most. When we finally pulled apart, she gave me a small, sad smile. "I'll try to be happy for you," she said softly. "Just give me time." And I nodded, swallowing hard. I'd give her all the time she needed, but I couldn't give up this chance, even if it meant breaking both our hearts a little. Now here I am, bags packed, waiting for my flight, wondering if I'm doing the right thing. I want to believe we'll get through it, that she'll understand, and that maybe one day she'll see that this choice was something I had to do. But I can't shake this feeling that maybe I am being selfish, that I'm choosing ambition over family, over loyalty. Even if she said she understood, I could still see the pain I was causing, the betrayal. So, here I am, airport coffee in hand, staring at my ticket and asking myself, AITA? So, here's the deal. I knew my sister's wedding was coming up for, what, a year? The whole family's been buzzing about it nonstop. Everyone's been recruited for something, seating arrangements, flower picking, cake tasting, you name it. My mom asked if I'd help organize some bridal shower games, and my sister assumed I'd be her right-hand person on the big day, making sure her dress didn't get wrinkled, guests were having fun, etc. In short, they had this vision of me as some devoted little sidekick. And yeah, they'd asked me way in advance. But as the date got closer, I had other things going on. Things I actually wanted to do. See, a big music festival was happening that same weekend. I'd been dying to go for years. One of those life bucket list things. This lineup was insane, with bands I've been obsessed with forever and artists who rarely tour. It was across the country, and yes, it clashed directly with my sister's wedding. But in my mind, it was one weekend out of my life. I could miss a wedding, right? I could fly out Thursday night, party all weekend, fly back Monday morning. A little R&R after the chaos, I figured. I kept quiet about my plans because I knew how it'd go down. My mom would cry. My dad would shake his head in that disappointed way. And my sister, oh man, she'd throw a fit. She's got this way of making everything about her, even when it isn't. I know, it was her wedding, but still, it's not like she was short on people willing to cater to her every need. She had bridesmaids, cousins, and a whole entourage. Me not being there wouldn't ruin anything. It was just another expected family duty, and I wasn't feeling it. When I finally told them a week before, the reaction was, well, exactly what I expected. My sister lost it. "You're kidding me, right?" she said, in that tone that's more shriek than words. She went on about how she'd counted on me, that she'd always envisioned me standing beside her, blah blah. I just stared at her and said, "Look, you'll be fine. You'll have mom, dad, everyone you need. I want to do this for me. It's just one wedding, and I'll be back before you even realize I'm gone." In my mind, it was the most reasonable explanation ever. But she just got angrier, shouting about how I was selfish and disrespectful. Even our mom looked horrified. The thing is, the more they pushed, the more I dug in my heels. Why did no one understand that I had something else going on? I'd spent my whole life doing what was right. Family dinners, birthdays, reunions, every holiday, every important family event. I hadn't missed one. And yet, the one time I wanted to break free and do something for myself, I was suddenly a monster. My sister was saying I was ruining her wedding, which was so dramatic it made me laugh out loud, which of course made things worse. My dad took me aside and said, "Look, if you do this, it's going to hurt your relationship with your sister." I shrugged and said, "That's her choice." He sighed, looked at me like I was some stranger he barely knew, and walked away. I felt a pang of guilt, but only briefly. I went to that festival, and it was epic. Every set, every song, every moment was pure magic. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I met amazing people, lost myself in the music, and danced under the stars with zero responsibilities or drama hanging over my head. I didn't check my phone once. I was free. When I got back on Monday, I was expecting fallout, but I was barely prepared for the cold shoulder. My sister wouldn't even look at me. She'd apparently been on the verge of tears at her wedding, constantly asking about me, and eventually had to be calmed down by one of her friends. My mom had barely been able to enjoy herself, whatever that means. The whole family made me feel like I'd committed some huge betrayal. At one point, my sister asked me point blank, "Why couldn't you just be there for me?" And I told her straight up, "Because it's your wedding, not mine. You had plenty of support. You didn't need me. And I didn't want to spend that day babysitting a dress train and fetching you champagne." The look on her face was like I'd slapped her. She walked out of the room without another word. Now I'm the family villain, apparently. I've gotten a dozen passive-aggressive texts from my mom, and my sister still hasn't returned my calls. Even some of my friends, when I told them the story, said I was harsh and that I should have just been there. I keep hearing that it was only one day, But to me, it was my life. Why is it so hard for people to understand that I get to make my own choices?